From now on, you need 2 showers every day. No excuses.
Why? Do I smell bad? Oh, sweetheart. He used the same trick on his last girlfriend. What trick?
The first time my boyfriend told me I smelled bad, I believed him. The 10th time I stopped trusting my own body. But the night I met his mother, I discovered the smell had never been coming from me. It was coming from a lie they had kept alive for years. Hello, my name is Jiren Bendis. I am 32 years old and I live in Columbus, Ohio. Until last year, I thought the worst thing a partner could do was cheat. I was wrong. Sometimes betrayal is quieter. Sometimes it enters your mind one small comment at a time, until you begin apologizing for taking up space. When I met Jacob Miller, he seemed gentle and dependable. We met at a charity 5K organized by the hospital where I worked as an insurance coordinator. I tripped over a traffic cone near the finish line, and Jacob caught my arm before I hit the pavement. He joked that saving me should earn him coffee. I laughed and agreed. For the next 4 months, everything felt easy. Jacob remembered how I took my coffee. He called when he said he would. He brought soup when I had the flu and sat outside my apartment until I felt comfortable letting him in. After years of dating men who treated honesty like an optional feature, his attention felt safe. Then, one evening, as we were watching a movie, he moved slightly away from me. "Claire, can I ask you something without hurting your feelings?" That sentence should have warned me. He said I sometimes had a noticeable body odor. I was embarrassed, but I thanked him for being honest. It had been a hot day, and I had come straight from work. I took a shower and changed my clothes. The next morning I showered again before breakfast. Jacob smiled and kissed my forehead. "Much better," he said. At first, that was all it was. But within weeks, a second daily shower stopped being a suggestion and became a rule. If I showered in the morning, Jacob wanted me to shower again before bed. If we went to the gym, that made 3. He bought me antibacterial soap and clinical deodorant, body scrubs, and expensive. Whenever I protested, his face became wounded. "I'm only telling you because I love you," he would say. "Would you rather strangers laugh behind your back?" That question terrified me. I began carrying deodorant in my purse. At work, I visited the restroom every few hours to check myself. I washed my clothes twice and stopped wearing the wool coat I loved because Jacob said it trapped odors. I asked my closest friend, Tasha, to tell me the truth. She sniffed my hair, my sweater, and even my scarf before looking at me as if I had lost my mind. "You smell like lavender and panic," she said. "That's all." I laughed, but I did not feel relieved. Jacob knew me intimately. Surely he could notice something other people missed. 2 months later, I visited a dermatologist. She found nothing wrong. A primary care doctor ordered blood tests. Everything came back normal. I even saw an endocrinologist because Jacob mentioned that unusual odor could indicate a metabolic condition. The specialist told me I was healthy. Then she asked a question no doctor had asked before. "Does anyone besides your boyfriend say you smell?" I admitted that no one did. She paused. "Then the medical problem may not belong to you." I should have listened. Instead, I went home and showered. By our first anniversary, my skin was dry and painful. Tiny cracks appeared around my elbows. Jacob complained that my medicated moisturizer smelled too strong, so I stopped using it around him. That was when he invited me to meet his mother. Her name was Evelyn. Jacob spoke about her constantly, but there was always a reason we could not meet. She had migraines. She was traveling. Her house was being renovated. Jacob described her as protective because his father had abandoned them when Jacob was 8. "She sacrificed everything for me," he said. "Please make a good impression." Before we left, he asked me to take another shower, even though I had showered 90 minutes earlier. "Mom is extremely sensitive to smells," he explained. I scrubbed until my skin burned. Evelyn lived in a large brick house outside Dublin, Ohio. The moment she opened the door, I smelled a thick cloud of cinnamon air freshener. Plug-in diffusers filled every outlet. Scented candles burned on every table. The fragrance was so powerful that my eyes watered. Evelyn hugged Jacob but only offered me her hand. She was elegant, perfectly dressed, and smiling without warmth. "So this is Claire?" she said. Then she leaned toward me and inhaled. I froze. "Jacob told me about your little problem," she whispered. My face went hot. Jacob stared at the floor. During dinner, Evelyn watched everything I did. When I reached for bread, she asked whether certain foods made my condition worse. When I used the restroom, I found soap, wipes, perfume, and a clean blouse arranged beside the sink. A handwritten note said, "For Claire, just in case." I wanted to leave. Jacob begged me not to embarrass him. Then something strange happened. Evelyn's neighbor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Parker, stopped by to return a casserole dish. When Evelyn introduced us, Mrs. Parker smiled. "You must be Jacob's girlfriend. You're lovely." Evelyn touched her nose and said, Claire has a medical issue, but we're being understanding. Mrs. Parker looked confused. She stood close enough to shake my hand. I don't notice anything, she said. Evelyn's smile disappeared. Your sense of smell has never been very sharp, Diane. Mrs. Parker's expression changed. She looked at Jacob, then at me, as if she had suddenly remembered something unpleasant. Before leaving, she slipped a folded paper into my hand. In the bathroom, I opened it. It contained a phone number and 6 words. Ask Jacob about Melissa and the showers. My heart began pounding. I put the note in my pocket and returned to dinner. For the first time, I watched mother and son instead of worrying about myself. Whenever Evelyn touched her nose, Jacob became tense. Whenever she criticized me, he apologized to her. He was not protecting me from his mother. He was helping her manage me. On the drive home, I asked who Melissa was. Jacob gripped the steering wheel. An ex-girlfriend. Did you make her shower twice a day? He nearly missed a red light. Then came anger. He accused Mrs. Parker of being a gossip. He said Melissa had poor hygiene and serious emotional problems. He told me his mother was trying to protect us from repeating the past. I remained quiet, but something inside me had changed. Shame had kept me obedient. Suspicion made me observant. The next morning I called Mrs. Parker. She told me Melissa had dated Jacob for almost 3 years. She had been friendly, confident, and close to marriage. Then Evelyn began claiming Melissa smelled bad. Jacob repeated it until Melissa became obsessed with cleanliness. She stopped seeing friends, lost weight, and eventually had a breakdown at a family gathering. After they separated, Melissa came here once, Mrs. Parker said. She asked whether I had ever noticed an odor. I told her no. She started crying. I asked why Evelyn would do something so cruel. Parker sighed. Evelyn cannot tolerate another woman becoming important to Jacob. She finds a weakness, or invents one, and he helps her press on it. That afternoon, Tasha helped me find Melissa online. She was living in Indianapolis and working as an elementary school librarian. I sent a careful message explaining who I was. I expected silence. She replied in 12 minutes. Has he started checking whether you shower? We spoke that night for 2 hours. Melissa's story was almost identical to mine, the special soaps, the medical appointments, the public humiliation. Evelyn had even given her a gift basket labeled, Fresh Start. Melissa said Jacob once sniffed her clothes before allowing her into his car. But she told me something worse. I heard Evelyn coaching him, she said. She told him that if he repeated a criticism often enough, you would start policing yourself. Then he wouldn't have to control you openly. I felt sick. Melissa had no recording, only memories and old messages. I had more. Jacob and I shared a tablet that synchronized with his phone. When I opened the message archive, I found a conversation between him and Evelyn. The messages went back months. Evelyn, she is getting too comfortable. Jacob, Claire says her doctors found nothing. Evelyn, then tell her doctors can miss things. Keep insisting. She needs to learn standards before you propose. Another message said, do not let her believe her friends over you. Then I found the sentence that ended our relationship in my heart. Jacob had written, sometimes I feel guilty. She scrubs until her skin turns red. Evelyn replied, guilt is temporary. A well-trained wife is permanent. Jacob had responded with a thumbs up. I photographed every message and sent the files to a private account. Then I consulted an attorney, not because I was married, but because Jacob had recently persuaded me to invest $25,000 in a small property management company he was starting with Evelyn. The money had not yet been transferred. The paperwork was scheduled to be signed at Evelyn's birthday dinner in 2 weeks. They believed I would become both a compliant wife and a convenient source of capital. I decided not to scream. I wanted the truth exposed in the same room where they planned to celebrate their control. For the next 2 weeks I acted normal. I showered twice a day. I apologized when Jacob wrinkled his nose. I even thanked Evelyn for recommending a new soap. Meanwhile, Melissa agreed to help me. So did Mrs. Parker. Tasha gathered copies of my medical bills. My attorney sent formal notice withdrawing me from the investment and prepared a demand that Jacob reimburse expenses he had pressured me to incur. The birthday dinner took place in a private room at an expensive restaurant. Evelyn invited 12 relatives and 2 business associates. She wore a silver dress and announced that the evening included a special family development. I knew Jacob planned to propose after I signed the investment papers. When dessert arrived, he stood and tapped his glass. He talked about love, loyalty, and how relationships required people to improve for one another. Then he reached into his jacket. Before he could kneel, I stood. I have a gift for your mother first, I said. Evelyn looked delighted. I handed her a white box. Inside were the soaps, deodorants, wipes, perfumes, and skin treatments she and Jacob had given me. On top lay copies of the messages between them. Her face drained of color. Jacob whispered my name. I turned to the guests and spoke calmly. For 10 months, Jacob and Evelyn told me I had a disgusting odor. 3 doctors found nothing. My friends noticed nothing. But they continued until I doubted my health, my judgment, and my right to be near other people. Jacob reached for my arm. I stepped away. "This is private," he hissed. "No," I replied. "My medical condition was private when your mother announced it to strangers. Your deception can survive the same audience." I read the messages aloud, including the line about a well-trained wife. One of the business associates quietly closed the investment folder. Jacob's aunt covered her mouth. Evelyn claimed the messages were jokes taken out of context. Then the door opened. Melissa walked in. Jacob looked as if he had seen a ghost. Melissa did not yell. She simply told the room what they had done to her, and how long it had taken to trust her own senses again. Mrs. Parker followed and confirmed what she had witnessed. Evelyn finally lost control. She shouted that women like us stole sons from their mothers. She said Jacob was weak and needed guidance. Then she pointed at me and screamed, "I knew the moment I saw her that she would take you away from me." The room went silent. There it was. The truth, spoken by the person who had worked hardest to hide it. Jacob began crying. He said his mother had manipulated him since childhood. He claimed he loved me and wanted another chance. For one dangerous second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the thumbs up beneath the message about my bleeding skin. "Your mother taught you the cruelty," I said. "But you practiced it on me every day. That part belongs to you." I placed his apartment key beside the untouched engagement ring and left. The consequences came quickly. The business associates withdrew after learning how Jacob and Evelyn had planned to use my investment. Without my money, their company collapsed before it opened. My attorney recovered most of the medical expenses after threatening a civil claim supported by their messages. I donated that money to a local organization that helps people leave controlling relationships. Jacob called from new numbers for months. I never answered. Evelyn sent one letter saying I had destroyed her family. I returned it unopened. My real revenge was not ruining them. They did that themselves. My revenge was becoming impossible to control. Healing took time. For weeks, I still checked my clothes before entering a room. Sometimes I stood beneath the shower and heard Jacob's voice telling me I was not clean enough. When that happened, I turned off the water, wrapped myself in a towel, and reminded myself that discomfort was not evidence. Melissa and I stayed in touch. We were not best friends, but we became proof for each other that neither of us had imagined what happened. Natasha bought me a new version of the wool coat I had thrown away. The first day I wore it, we went for coffee, and she made a dramatic show of smelling the sleeve. "Lavender," she announced, and significantly less panic. I laughed so hard that people stared. For once, I did not wonder what they thought of me. A year later, I met someone new. On our third date, I told him the entire story. I expected disbelief or pity. Instead, he asked, "What helps you feel safe now?" That question showed me the difference between care and control. Care asks what you need. Control tells you what is wrong with you, then sells obedience as the cure. I still shower every day. Sometimes twice, if I have exercised or spent an afternoon gardening. But now it is my decision. No one stands outside the door. No one checks the soap. No one makes me prove I deserve affection. Jacob wanted a woman who would wash away every part of herself to keep him comfortable. Instead, he taught me something I will never forget. The moment I stopped trying to wash away an imaginary stain was the moment I finally saw who was truly dirty.